John Schmidt, the Book Kahuna. I want to welcome you to another edition of Pub Talk. And today I have a very special guest. He's been on Pub Talk before, but we've done a reprise because we thought it was time, since a lot of things have been going on in the world and that just are events that we need to be aware of. And it's my buddy John Higgs. Now, John and I met we were in a Toastmasters group here in Lafayette, Colorado. And needless to say, John and I went up against each other in a lot of different speeches and things. And of course, many a time, John got the better of me. But he's still my buddy anyway. And the first thing I wanted to say is he's got this book, and I read this book. It's Dealing with Danger. It's all about how you can be prepared for whatever comes up, any situation. Now, since we had our last discussion, there have been a few different situations that I want to ask John about. And the first one I wanted to ask him about is, John, this Orlando thing, okay? You're out having a good time. You're in a club. There's a lot of people. What do? I mean, how do you keep yourself in a position where you are safe? And first, if you want to give us a little background on how you got involved with this and then just lead right into the whole Orlando thing, I leave it up to you. So okay, take it away, John.
Well, hi, Don. Thanks for having me back on the show again. It was fun last time, and looking forward to talking about a few different things today. Yeah, how did I get involved in this? The story that I always tell people is it started when I was still living in London back in the 1980s. And there was a riot in our street. And when I say a riot, I mean somewhere in the region of about 300 angry youths at one end of the street and 100 police officers at the other end of the street. And my wife and me sitting in our house somewhere in the middle, watching things unfold. And if you've ever been in a riot, you'll probably remember feeling completely helpless, because you've got this just huge sea of humanity moving around you. And it's hard to read a crowd like that and know exactly what's going to happen. And it's hard to find a way out sometimes. So we were in the position where we had to just kind of hunker down and hope for the best. And as it turned out, the police got a hold of the situation quite quickly and dispersed the crowd. But the image that I always have in my mind is it was a two-story house that we were in, and we were in the upper story in the front bedroom overlooking the street. And at one point, I remember standing at the top of the stairs, looking down the stairs to our front door and wondering what would happen when all these people who were milling around and getting angry outside decided that maybe instead of going up the street or down the street, they were going to come through my front door. And with it being England, the only weapon I had was one of those three-pronged garden fork things you use for turning over sod in the backyard. So I'm standing there holding this thing at the top of the stairs, wishing that somehow it would turn itself into a 12-gauge shotgun, but it never did. And it's a horrible feeling. You feel helpless. You're not quite sure if you're doing the right thing or if you should be doing something else. And I started thinking about it afterwards, that there's got to be a better way to go through life rather than just getting dropped into one situation to the next and hoping that things work out okay. And over a long period of time, I started coming up with a few ideas about how we can be more aware of our surroundings, how we can develop simple plans for specific situations, and just be a little bit ahead of the game. And I think maybe even with just those few simple preparations, it will help most people to get through most things most of the time. And that's about as good as we can hope for. So that was really the background to it. Nothing really came of the book until a couple of decades later. But in the meantime, I was lucky. I had some good teachers along the way, in the firearms field and in other areas. Good friends of mine who had been in, various special forces groups and those kinds of backgrounds where they were kind enough to share a lot of information with me, and I was able to start distilling it down into something that worked for me. And that gradually evolved into writing the book Dealing with Danger, to pass a lot of those ideas and principles on to people so that just about anybody can adopt some of the ideas in the book, some of the principles of the book, and have a better chance of surviving situations that we never want to get into, but we find ourselves in. And even better, if you can see something coming down the road before it gets to you, and you can find a way to either deal with it or avoid it, that's a winning situation as well. So that was the guiding force behind writing Dealing with Danger.
And now, since we've last spoken, we've had a couple of things happen worldwide where you had Paris, you had Belgium, you had San Bernardino, you have Orlando. And how can we avoid being put into situations like that? What do we look for?
Let's look at the San Bernardino attack, for example. That was basically a couple of embedded terrorists who planned to shoot up a workplace, and they were very successful in that, unfortunately. With a situation like that, where you've got someone who's planning over a long period of time to commit that kind of a terrorist attack, first of all, the people around that person, the friends, relatives, neighbors, people they work with, you need to kind of be aware of what's going on around you and how someone like that, maybe their personality starts to change, maybe their behavior starts to change. And I hate to Monday morning quarterback something like that, because it's very easy to say, oh, the neighbors should have noticed something, the people at work should have noticed something. It's not always that easy, and I think we have a tendency to look at something like that and say, hey, I've known this person for quite a long time. He's not acting quite the way he used to. And then maybe the next thought is, well, maybe I'm just being judgmental. Maybe I'm just over-exaggerating. Maybe I'm just being silly about this. And then you kind of feel guilty, and then you dismiss the whole thing. I think we have to be more objective in the way that we evaluate people, and it's a constant evaluation of people and situations around us as they unfold. And I think in a lot of these kinds of shooting situations, flags were raised at an earlier time, and someone can go back afterwards and say, you remember that thing he said 3 months ago that we were all wondering what he meant, and it just kind of sounded weird, and yet nobody ever followed up on it. And that's part of why you get these situations occurring, and why, from the terrorist point of view, they're successful, because people don't want to be judgmental. They don't want to raise red flags and then be found wrong. It's one of those kinds of things. It's almost a human nature thing. They don't want to rock the boat too much. So I think that's a lot to do with it. There was something else you mentioned, and I just...
Oh, Brussels, Paris, Orlando.
Yeah, same thing. Let's look at Orlando. That was a situation where it all happened in one night, and certainly pretty much all of the people who were in that gay nightclub where that horrific shooting took place had no prior knowledge of the shooter. They were just in there having a fun time on the weekend, and a guy walks in and starts shooting up the place. That was really the first that almost all of them knew about that. So now we look at a slightly different situation that applies just about to everybody in almost any physical location. You walk into a place, maybe the first thing you do, if you haven't been in there before, is figure out if something happens, It could be a terrorist attack. It could be a fire. It could be something like that.
Right.
Where I need to get out quickly. How many ways are there out of this place? And in the book, I talk about walking into a restaurant like that, because just about everybody goes into a restaurant at some time. How many ways are there to get out of a restaurant? Well, the first one is there's the way you just came in. You can just backtrack and go out that way. If for some reason, whether it's an active shooter or if the place is on fire or something, maybe you can't get out that way. Well, there's almost certainly going to be at least one other emergency exit in a public place like that. And then there's a third one, which is through the kitchen and out through the back door of the kitchen, which most people don't generally think about. So you walk into a place, you go, okay, here's three ways I can get out if I have to. And then you can start evaluating, well, who's in here and what does this place look like? I don't know about you, Don. I've had a couple of times in my life where I've walked into a bar and it's been kind of like a neighborhood bar somewhere where everybody knows everybody else. And the first thing they do, everybody turns around and looks you up and down. It's like, who are you? And usually it's okay, but occasionally you might get that vibe where it's like, don't quite think I'm going to fit in here. And you've got a choice. You can either go, I'm just being silly, it'll be fine. Or you can go, I think I'm going to read that vibe and just go and get a drink in that place down the street. It's all about constantly evaluating what's going on around you in terms of how does this affect me? Is it a positive vibe that I'm getting back, or is it negative? Is it negative? Am I going to tell myself I'm just being silly and everything's going to be okay? Or I'm going to trust my instincts and decide I'm going to take a different course of action. Maybe I should be somewhere else.
Do you see that since we last talked, even that society has become more involved with looking at their phones when they should be actually taking stock in what's happening in their location?
Absolutely. And this is just a result of modern technology advancing at an incredibly fast rate. I mean, 10 years ago, how many people were on their phones the whole time? It's been quick. And human behavior hasn't really advanced to adjust to that new technology. I mean, we use our phones, we understand how to use them, we get a lot of good use out of them, but how do they fit into the rest of our lives? And you can find YouTube clips and everything of people being on their phones and stepping out under a bus or tripping over in the street, or all those kinds of things. And our behavior has not caught up with the technology. There's got to be a way that we can use that technology, but at the same time, we're being aware of our surroundings. The only time that you can really just get onto your phone or whatever other device it is and just become completely engrossed in it is if you're already in a safe environment. If you're at home, sitting in your armchair, the doors are locked, all this kind of thing, you can go into what we call condition white. And let me just explain that. During I think it was World War II, the United States Marine Corps came up with a color code system of awareness for their troops, and there was a Marine Corps colonel named Jeff Cooper who went on to found a shooting school called Gunsight in Arizona, and he took the basic Marine Corps color code system of awareness and he adapted it to his use for when he was teaching. Under the Cooper system, there are 4 colors of awareness. The lowest level of awareness is condition white. In condition white, you're physically asleep or you're completely unaware of what's going on around you. In condition yellow, your radar is running. You may be on your cell phone, but you're also glancing around. You're also paying attention to what you can hear, see, smell, taste, touch, using all your senses. In condition orange, something alerts you to focus in on something that you need to be more aware of. And then in condition red, that's when you decide that what you just saw or what you just experienced is something you need to take action to deal with or avoid. And it's one of those things. Think about it. And some people may say, "Well, I wasn't in the Marine Corps. I never have to deal with things like that. You know, why should I be interested?" Think about driving through a really busy part of downtown somewhere on a major expressway. If you're driving it safely and you're avoiding a potential accident with people changing lanes, braking in front of you, accelerating up behind you, all the way that those cars move around you, you're already doing a lot of those things that we talk about with Cooper's color code system of awareness. If you're in condition white, you're pretty soon going to run into something or run off the road because you're not paying attention to anything. If you're in condition yellow, you're watching all those vehicles around you. You're making sure that as their speed and direction changes, you alter your speed and direction accordingly. You're going through that yellow and orange categories up and down the whole time, making sure you stay safe. If somebody has a wreck in front of you, you go right to condition red, which is, okay, I'm hitting the brakes, I'm swerving to avoid them, or whatever it is. So I use that driving example because most people can relate to that. And you know that if you're driving and all you're doing is looking at your cell phone, you know you're going to have a wreck sooner rather than later. So that's the whole awareness thing. And you can take that and you can apply it to just about every situation in your life. You know, even if it's something like monitoring your health. If you're a diabetic and you're monitoring your blood sugar, you're doing the same thing. You're paying attention to something that has a potential to be harmful to you, and you're aware of it on a regular basis, and you're adapting your behavior according to the information you get back from being aware of checking your blood or whatever it is. So that's kind of the way that works.
So for most of the time, we should actually be in a yellow state?
Yes. Yeah, your radar is running. You're using all of those sensors just to monitor the situation. Hear, see, touch, taste, smell, hear, see, touch, taste, and I forgot the last one, but there's 5 of them anyway. Hear, see, touch, taste, and smell. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So, and that way, you know, that doesn't mean to say you can't just sit down and get engrossed in a good movie or a good book or something at home, but you do it in a safe environment. You know, before you sit down and have a few beers and watch a movie, you make sure that all the doors and windows in your home are locked and everything, and now you're in a safe environment, and you can just you can get completely engrossed in something, or you can physically go to sleep. It's the same thing as just locking all the doors and windows before you go to bed. Same principle.
So your home is your safe zone. That's a white. You go out, you stay in yellow, and that would be all the time. And what specifically are we looking for in a yellow situation to make sure that we're aware and not looking at our phones all the time?
Are you talking about, are we going back to, you know, like the Orlando nightclub shooting or something like that as an example? Or?
Like in Orlando, or like say you're traveling. I'm going to be traveling to Europe next month. So I'm really thinking about these things right now, what I should be looking for, what I should be aware of. And I am going to be traveling through a couple of these places that have been targets recently. So, you know, I think for anybody who's traveling, even within, you know, domestically within the United States, what should we be on the lookout for? What in our area of how we can stay safe and keep things under our own control that don't get out of our control?
Let's look at the example. I think it was about a year or so ago. There were three young American guys on a train in Europe. It was either France or Belgium, I forget now.
Right.
And there was a knife attack on the train that was basically some form of terrorist sponsored knife attack. And these 3 young American guys jumped in and stopped that attack. So you've got a situation where you're basically you're on a speeding train. So you can get away. You may be able to move to another carriage or something like that, but you can't exactly get off the train and just avoid the situation. So they were aware of what was going on. When they saw this young terrorist launch his knife attack, they decided that they had to take action. So they were aware of their surroundings. They saw a situation developing, and they took action. They jumped in and they subdued him and everything else. That was almost like a cage match in a way, that they couldn't just get away from the situation. If you can just get away from it and be safe that way, that's great. But they actually had to deal with it.
Right.
So that's the kind of situation where it's even more important to always be aware of what's going on around you, because where you are is where you are, and there's no getting away from it. You have to deal with it. We go back
I remember that situation because a lot of the commentators in the news were saying, well, could something like this happen here? And I was thinking something like this did happen here. I was a Long Island Railroad commuter in 1993, and a guy named Colin Ferguson went through and shot up the train and killed like 8 people on the train. And seriously, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to eventually leave New York, because I didn't want to be in a situation where I was totally out of control when I was on the train. Anything could happen to you and you have nowhere to go. So
right. So the option of escaping to safety is not on the cards when you're in a moving train and you're locked in there. So you've got an option to shelter in place, which again on a moving train, you're really rolling the dice whether that's going to work. You can try and just hunker down somewhere and hope he doesn't walk into your part of the carriage or doesn't notice you. Or you've got the third option, which is probably going to be the most effective, which is you're going to have to take him on and fight. And that's one of the problems you see with some of these areas where weapons are banned, that it's the law-abiding people who observe those bans and say, okay, I can't take my weapon, whatever it is, knife, club, firearm, whatever, into this building because they won't let me, which is all well and good as long as it's a level playing field. But then a lot of these people who walk into places like that and start shooting the place up, they ignore the signs that say no weapons. They're already breaking the law by doing that. So it comes down to the same thing. It's the commuter's version of a cage match, and you're either going to have to fight to win, or you're going to have to, consider a bad outcome.
And even that's the same thing as with the Holmes deal with the theater in Aurora. He actually went out and scoped out all the places that had the we don't want you bringing your concealed carry into this establishment before he decided on that particular theater.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that's the problem with these places that ban concealed carry. And we're talking about concealed carry being a perfectly legal option in whatever municipality it is. Almost every state, I think actually all 50 states now have some version of concealed carry. The restrictions and constraints vary. But going back to the idea of hoping that a sticker on the door is going to prevent crime, it just doesn't work that way. And it's just a fact of life that the people like the Aurora shooter, he planned that whole thing over a long period of time, the explosives and the firearms and everything else. And to think that he would get loaded up and walk up to the theater, look at the sticker on the door and say, oh, well, I guess I'm done there. I might as well just go home and watch TV. It's beyond being naive. So we have to find a better way to do it. And one of the ways is, as individuals, we have to evaluate our situation constantly and look at things like that and see, You know, what is this? Or one of the questions that I suggest to people is when you're given some situation, the first thing you do is you ask yourself the question, what does this mean for me? You know, a lot of us have been in this situation. I think you have, I know I have, where you walk into work one day and you get told, hey, we're going to be downsizing. You know, some people are not going to be here tomorrow. And what's the first thing that runs through your mind? It's that question, well, how does this affect me? How does it affect me if I get laid off? How does it affect me if the people around me get laid off and suddenly I'm doing 4 other people's work as well? You're always thinking, how does it affect me? Why can't you take that same question and apply it every time you walk into a building that you've never been in before, or some other situation that could have a potential bad outcome? How does this affect me? Because once you start asking that question, then you can start looking at, well, this is how it might affect me. This might happen or that might happen. And if that's the case, how am I going to react? And then you start that train of thought that hopefully leads you to a solution to either avoid or deal with a potential situation. If nothing happens, you're still a winner. If something does go bad, at least you've got the beginnings of a plan to get yourself out of there or to deal with the situation.
So it's all about planning, forethought, and making sure that you're more aware of your surroundings and your situation. And the one thing I wanted to say is that we're not doing this program to be induce fear. What we're trying to do is make it so that people will actually think about these things in situations and make sure that they are prepared for the inevitable that might happen. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd much rather, spend a little bit of time coming up with a simple plan for a specific situation, and then nothing happens. It's still a win. It's better than having no plan and getting stuck in the middle of something bad with no idea how to deal with it or avoid it. And like I say, I go back to the example of driving in heavy traffic, because most people have that plan the whole time. If that car in front of me suddenly hits the brakes, have I planned to have enough room to be able to stop before I run into the back of him? If that car on the right-hand side of me suddenly starts coming into my lane, do I have a plan to make sure that I can avoid getting hit from the side? You're doing those kinds of things almost without thinking about it when you're driving. You just should be aware of everything that's going on around you. We can take that basic thought process and expand it to a lot of other areas of our lives without really too much additional effort for most people. It's just a question of conditioning people to start thinking that way.
Now, have you actually formulated possibly like a list of places where you think that people should be more, attentive to their surroundings, what's happening? Maybe like malls, church.
In the context of terrorism, you mean, or just
what you would consider a list of like possibly a soft target where people should be more aware and just be ready for knowing where the exit is to get out if they need to.
I think you have to, at this point, pretty much include almost any public place. You can look at, there was, I think it was Tacoma, Washington. I think there was a big shootout in a shopping mall there, if I remember correctly. You can look at, there was a large church in Colorado Springs a few years ago where a woman walked in. I think it was a woman walked in. Somebody walked in and started shooting up the church. There's a lot of places like that where it's either going to be a shooting attack, or it's going to be some kind of explosive or incendiary device that gets put into a public place. So it's really a question of, for the individual, looking at the place that they're about to walk into and just asking that question, play the what if game. What if somebody walked in and started shooting the place up? What if someone had put some kind of explosive device in here? What if someone decided to drive their truck or their car through the front door? We've seen all of those kinds of events at some point. And
what if it's the middle of summer and somebody walks in wearing a winter coat?
I'd look at that and go, what's going on? Does this person look out of place? Do they look like they don't fit in? And you can get into some kind of dangerous territory there as well. I'm not saying that anybody who doesn't look like the rest of us is a potential threat. But all I'm saying is that, that human nature is pretty good about that kind of thing. Quite often your first instinct is a good one. You glance over and you just see somebody walking into an establishment. It's like, that's weird, and then the next thought is either, well, I'm just being silly, or I'm being prejudicial, or it's, wait a minute, why does that person seem so out of place in this setting? And then you can go through a little bit more rational review of who are they, why do I think they're there, is their behavior abnormal for this environment that we're in right now, and you can start going down the list of just evaluating it. If you've got a guy who's wearing a bright red suit, with white furry cuffs and sleeves and everything, walking into a building, and it's not Christmas, and he's dressed up as Santa Claus in the middle of August, goofy example, but you have to look at it and go, that's a little bit strange. That doesn't fit the place or the time of year for that kind of behavior, whatever. And a lot of times you look at something and go, okay, well, as it turns out, it's not a big deal, but at least you've gone through that process of evaluating and coming to a decision. And that, I think, is the most important thing.
And as you were alluding to, like, it's not about profiling, because I read 2 books back in the 70s on terrorism and counterterrorism. And one of the things that they were talking about was the fact that, like, money talks. And if you have, like, El Fatah, back in the 70s, who wants to, like, contract out something to, say, like, Sinn Féin, and, like, have somebody, Irish go and do something, you're not going to be looking for somebody, you know what I mean? It's not going to fit together. So that was the fear, was that all the insurgent groups of terrorism would get together and start sharing. Red Brigades, the FLQ up in Canada, all these, they would get together and start, like, doing, contracting out little hits or things for each other. You can't look at it like, oh, he looks like who I would expect that to be. No, that's not what we're saying. You got to be prepared for anybody and be on the lookout all the time and be vigilant.
That's exactly right. And there's 2 points I want to make about that, because you're 100% correct. And as you were explaining that, I was trying to remember, there was an article in, I think, the British newspaper, The Observer, back in the late 90s or the early 2000s, I can't remember exactly when, that reported, you mentioned Sinn Féin, you mentioned the IRA, the Irish Army. Those guys, from the late 1960s onwards, the IRA has a reputation of having some of the best bomb makers in the world. It was what they got good at. And the article, which I think was in the Observer newspaper, reported that there was a at least well known to the security authorities, Irish bomb maker who had actually been contracted by one of the Middle Eastern terrorist groups to go out there and teach them how to make a certain kind of bomb in a certain way. And the backstory to that was that terrorists in different parts of the world will sell or trade information. They'll trade training techniques and all those kinds of things. And it was when they started seeing exactly the same kinds of bombs that the IRA had been making in Northern Ireland showing up and being used in the Middle East that some of these security organizations started to connect the dots. So yeah, definitely terrorists talk to each other, they train each other, and they swap information, to their mutual benefit.
And going hand in glove with that, the Tsarnaev brothers, the Boston Marathon bombing.
Mm-hmm.
I even said to one of my buddies, like 2 days before they got into and identified them, I wonder if these guys might be Chechen. And it was like 2 days before they even had IDs on these guys. And it's, and you wouldn't pick them out as like, hey, these are the guys. So you got to be prepared for everybody now.
Yeah, that's true. And quite honestly, bombs are completely indiscriminate. So we're kind of to the point where I don't really care where it was made or who made it. Not at that point in time. If I'm standing there looking at it, it's a bomb, and you can worry afterwards about how did they get their training and where did they get their supplies and everything. You've got an immediate problem you have to deal with, which is either you've got to either diffuse it, which isn't probably an option for most people, or you've got to get away from it. And we'll worry about the politics of it afterwards, but you've got an immediate problem you have to fix. I think I think it's interesting. You kind of reminded me when we were talking about that. I want to tell you a quick story that happened to me. This was mid-1980s. I hadn't been living in America all that long. I was in downtown Chicago one day and went into the one of the big post offices down there downtown. And I'm standing in line waiting to, go and buy stamps or whatever it was. And I'm looking around and I happened to see a briefcase on a shelf up against the wall on the far side of the public area of the post office. Well, growing up in the UK, in the 60s and 70s, we got used to IRA bombings and all those kinds of things. We got conditioned with public information messages about, if you see an unattended package in a public place, report it, in case because the IRA was leaving bombs lying around and everything. So, 10 years on, I'm standing in this post office in Chicago and I look around and I see this briefcase with nobody within 50 feet of it. And I'm starting to get a little bit edgy because I go back to what I learned before. And I was just thinking about going over and maybe, trying to find one of the postal officials to say something. And this uniformed police officer walked in. I'm thinking, oh, this is good. If he doesn't see the case, I'll go over and talk to him about it. So he looks around and he sees the briefcase and he walks over to it. And I'm watching him from, the other side of the office. And he looks at the case, he picks it up, he turns around, he goes, and he yells out to the whole building. He goes, whose case is this? And I'm thinking, this is great. He's going to find, if somebody's just left it lying around, he's going to ream this guy for leaving an unattended package in a public place. And there's a guy over the other side of the post office who looks up and realizes it's his case. And he goes, officer, it's mine. He walks over to the officer. And the officer says, sir, this briefcase unattended in this post office. I'm thinking, here it comes. He's going to nail this guy and read him the riot act. And then he says, sir, someone might have stolen your briefcase. You don't want to have to deal with that, do you? And he hands him the case and he walks. And I'm about ready just to tear my hair out at that point. And the point is, what the officer said in context really wasn't all that bad. There probably was, at that time, Chicago, 1980s, the odds of somebody putting a bomb in a post office was probably almost negligible. But from my perspective of seeing things in London 10 years earlier getting blown up, I wasn't thinking the same way that police officer was. And I think a lot of this just comes down to your environment, what you grew up with, or what you've learned to deal with. And at that time, we didn't really have a problem with terrorism. Now it's all changed. So we have to adapt. We have to adapt to changing conditions. That's the story, anyway.
Well, no, that's a good story because it just makes you aware that even sometimes law enforcement is looking at things from a different perspective as well. And, but I'm sure not now. I mean, I'm sure now it's like, they would be cordoning off the area and getting the robot in to like pick up the case and take it out. But
yeah, and blow up the case, and the guy loses his lunch and his cell phone or something. But yeah, but you're absolutely right. So it's different, and it's one of those things where we have to adapt to changing conditions. And I think a lot of times people look at the whole terrorism thing, they go, why are they doing this? Why? I don't understand what's going on with this. And I think you have to look at the real goals of terrorism. And I wrote it down. I wanted to be sure I got it right. But terrorism, it's all about bringing political change to a situation. It's about coercing governments into performing a specific course of action. And the third one is it's about killing political enemies. And then I think with those three kind of bullet points, everything else starts to fit into place about why we're seeing such a lot of terrorist activity around the world. It's replaced civilized discourse and changing things politically and that kind of thing. It's all about changing the way these people think the world should be, and it's, in their view, it's the easy way to do it, through violence and coercion.
Not that you have a crystal ball or anything, but do you see that things are going to get more dicey here in the United States in the near future?
I think what I see is that our society will change to become more security conscious, and that could mean that helps us to protect our values and our ways of life. We can continue to do all the things we do. It's just there has to be increased security to enable us to do it safely. I think that's one approach. I think the other approach is that over time, if the terrorists win, then our way of life will be forced into change, and we're on that knife edge. It's okay. Which way do we want to go? Do you want to continue with the rule of law and the Constitution and the way that America and pretty much the rest of the Western world has been, or do you want to go completely over to the other side? And it all depends on how well we deal with the violence and the coercion and the propaganda, from the other side.
That pretty much says it. Pretty much says it all. But now these are man-made dangers. We haven't even touched on the dangers that are made from nature. Like we have a whole system of what's happening in Louisiana right now with the flooding. So, like, how would you prepare for those kind of dangers when it's a natural event?
Well, at least with natural events, you may get a little bit of warning. This is not the first time that Louisiana's flooded. You can go back to the whole New Orleans flooding, several years ago. And I hope, I mean, my heart goes out to all of those people down there. It's a great part of, if you've ever been to New Orleans, it's a great part of the world. There's some friendly people down there, the whole thing. But it just seems that every time it rains really, really heavily, the weather gets really bad. You get some occurrence of flooding and people getting flooded out of their houses and everything. And again, it just comes down to maybe they need some long-term planning and better mitigation of floodplains and all that kind of thing. I think it's a lot easier to prepare for something and either not have it happen, or if it does happen, you're better prepared and you've got more chance of surviving it, rather than just saying, well, if it happens, it happens, I'll deal with it then. So Louisiana, that whole thing, they know what the weather's like down there. They know what the terrain is like and everything else. I hope that they can find a way to build better dikes and reroute the water better and all that kind of thing. But so far, I don't know. I don't know how much they've done of that, and whatever they've done, it's not enough yet to fix the problem. It's like Christmas, it's pretty much inevitable. We're always going to get bad weather. Might as well find a way to try and fix it before it occurs. And on the individual basis, if you live in a floodplain, it's not just in Louisiana, but anywhere, if you live in a floodplain, if you live near a river that, every decade or so, it bursts its banks and floods the surrounding area. And I think I got this example in the book. How would it be if you set a point where you say, okay, I know that I live next to this river, and when the river crests to 17 feet deep, it floods the whole surrounding area. So you set this, what I call a decision point, which is if the river ever reaches 15 feet, 2 feet before it floods, that is my signal that I'm going to bug out. Bug out bad, throw all my stuff in the car, I'm going to boogie on out of here for a few days. If the river bursts its banks and floods the house, at least I'm not there to have to deal with it at the time. I'm safe somewhere. And if the river never bursts its banks, well, I never got to that point where I had to bug out anyway. So you can kind of set your own parameters for, if this happens, I'll do that. If it doesn't happen.
John, I don't mean to interrupt you, but explain to everyone what the bug out bag, and what does a bug out bag contain?
A bug out bag basically contains everything you need to leave, your normal environment and survive for a certain amount of time. So when I started writing the whole part about bug out bags, I looked at them in different ways, starting off from the very, very small bug out bag all the way up to, the monumental catastrophe kind of bug out bag. And the way I started off, I said, okay, your absolute micro bug out bag would be something that was small enough to fit in your pocket and could get you home. Think about 9/11 with all those people in New York who were affected when the planes went into the Twin Towers. Cell phone usage was virtually non-existent. That was toast. There was a lot of people who couldn't even get off the island, because all the roads were blocked and this kind of thing. How could those people survive for, say, 24 or 48 hours or 72 hours away from home before they could actually find their way home? What would they need? How about a credit card, some cash, maybe 72 hours worth of whatever medication that they may be on? Little things like that, so that if you can't stay in your office building, and if you can't get home, at least you've got just a handful of things that can help you maybe find a hotel room for the night, or make sure you can go out and buy dinner or whatever it is. Even just pop a couple of aspirin if you need it. And that's really the smallest version of the bug out bag, and then you build on it from there, depending on how long you expect to be away from home or your comfort zone kind of thing. All the way up to you see guys packing huge bug out bags with 2 weeks worth of supplies. That's great if you expect that you're going to be stuck in some Red Cross outfit or something for 2 weeks. Take all the stuff you need. So the bug out bag idea really is to give you everything you need to survive day to day for however long you think that particular disaster is going to last you, and you plan accordingly. That's the gist of it.
Have you had a personal experience where you had to like grab your bug out bag and go?
No, not really. We've come kind of close a couple of times just with severe weather where we started thinking about it. 2012, I think it was, we had some really severe rainstorms coming through this area that caused a lot of flooding in Colorado. And we were actually planning at the time, the night it started raining, we were actually planning a trip out of town. So we were already packed. And as it turned out, we didn't have to bug out. The flooding didn't get close to the house, anywhere near close to the house. But we were ready to go. And we could have survived for several days quite easily if we'd had to, One thing I'll throw in there while we're talking about that, we do have one of those emergency radios that you can get all the NOAA frequencies and everything. And we had it set up so that every time there was an emergency broadcast from local government about flooding or anything like that, the radio actually beeped and turned on. So it woke us up several times that night just as we were getting updates about local conditions. But, I'd rather be woken up by the radio chirping at me to tell me that it's still raining, than to wake up and find out the carpet's wet and there's water coming in under the door, So you try and pick you always try and pick the lesser of two evils, if you like, the better condition out of the two. And that worked out pretty well for us. Right.
And like same thing would be appropriate if say there was a fire like's going on in California right now. Mm-hmm. Just have your bug out bag ready. If the flames get in and you get the reverse 911 call to get out, you just grab it and go.
Yep, that's right. And prior to that, the planning is really just asking yourself a few questions. What is the most likely disaster that I may need to face? So if you live in a heavily forested area, it's probably a forest fire. If you live you're right next to a major river or below a large dam or something, it's probably flooding. You can kind of work out what it is for your situation, and then once you know what you may have to deal with, then you ask yourself, where will I go? Who will I take with me? What will I take with me? How long would we expect to stay away from home? And what is the event that would cause us to bug out? And if you can answer those 5 things, you've probably already got a pretty good plan solidified as to what you should do and how you should accomplish it. It's not rocket science. It's just you got to work through keep the questions simple and keep the answers simple, and you'll probably come up with a pretty good plan. And that will help you to decide what you need to put in the bug out bag if you know where you're going to go and how long you may have to stay. How many days worth of medication, how much food, all that kind of thing.
Right. And what I'm hearing from some of what happened in California too is part of your plan should not just be the bug out bag and like you jump in your car and you go, but actually a plan that has a couple of different scenarios on how you go. Because we had people who actually like drove into the fire in California. So being aware of where the fire is and staying away from it, going in a different direction, you might want to have like 3 or 4 different avenues to get out.
Absolutely. And one of the things you have to take into account is that just about everybody else in your area is going to be doing the same thing. So, roads can get clogged. that I forget that there's at least a couple of disaster movies out there where people are sitting on the highways in traffic with nowhere to go. You know, it's that kind of scenario. So maybe I can think of one example not too far from here, where there was it was a grass fire in a rural area that came up. You know, middle of summer, lightning strike started this grass fire, and the grass fire was being pushed by the wind and heading towards a fairly rural kind of subdivision. And county sheriff was out there going house to house, telling people, you know, you got 5 minutes to grab what you need, and you need to get out of here because we've got this grass fire coming your way. Well, it was an older subdivision. It only had one real way in and out, and that road was blocked with people trying to get out. So you have to think about things like that, and how would you adapt to that situation? Maybe you don't have the luxury of spending half an hour or an hour loading the truck or the car with everything you think you're going to need, because it's going to take you 20 minutes just to get through the traffic, just to get to the main road. You know, all of those things you have to consider. How long is it going to get to where I'm going? And does everybody else have the same idea? You know, if I think I'm going to just go down to that nearest Motel 6 and hang out for 2 or 3 days, well, guess what? There's 2,000 other people who've got the same idea. So I'm going to have to adapt and find something else. But a little planning up front, a little sensible planning, I think goes a very long way, especially when it's an emotional situation anyway. You know, it's a grass fire. You don't know if your house is going to be there when you finally come back. You know, it's emotional. And if you've already thought your way through a lot of these things and even made some notes, come up with a short written plan, you are so far ahead of the game compared to most other people.
So we've dealt with flooding, we've dealt with fires, but we've got two others that one of them doesn't really occur in Colorado, hurricanes, but tornadoes. Because I believe we're on the edge of Tornado Alley. So,
yes.
You just listen for the alarm to go off. You just go in your basement. You stay there. I guess you don't. Should you leave and try and get away? Take your bug out bag and go if you get the tornado warning.
That's a little bit more tough because, you know, tornadoes, they're kind of fickle. You know, they can touch down in different points, and I don't think you can ever really predict exactly where they're going to come through. That's one of those things where you really have to make your own decision. You know, we've seen so many examples of tornadoes that have come down a street and decimated every house on one side of the street and left everything else on the other side intact. We've seen people who've sheltered in place. I mean, a lot of the older rural houses have those deep cellars, you know, with the what do they call them? The tornado
storm doors,
tornado doors, and everything, so
yeah.
you can get in there easily. That's something that wherever you live, you're going to have to work out for yourself exactly the best way to deal with it. You know, you see people who try and escape from a tornado, and it winds up following them, kind of thing. Very hard thing to predict. So as long as you've got some basic ideas, some core principles about your safety, and the first thing is to look around and go, well, what is likely in this area where I'm at right now? You know, if you're in the middle of a desert, then a forest fire is not going to be a problem.
Right.
You know, if you're in the middle of Iceland or somewhere, a tornado is probably not a problem. So the first thing is, what's the likely thing here? And of course, it varies. You know, we're 21st century human beings. We travel wide distances. And when we go to a different area, we have to sit down and evaluate, okay, well, I know how to escape from home, but here I am on vacation in some other part of the world. What are the problems I may face here? And just come up with short, simple plans that at least get you started in the right course of action, you know, if you have to.
And going back to, now to switch gears again, but to go back, the one that we haven't discussed is what happened in Mumbai. If you're traveling,
Okay.
where in the hotel
Mm-hmm.
where the terrorists took over the floors of the hotel.
Yep.
In that situation,
That's a really tough one, and um, I don't want this answer to sound like a cop out. It's not meant to be, but maybe traveling to Mumbai wasn't the smartest thing to do in the first place. And I don't mean to sound trite like that, but there are some parts of the world where I think you have to look seriously at it and go, I need to weigh risk against reward. Well, what's the payoff for me to go to Mumbai or somewhere like that, as opposed to what is the risk? So I think that's the first thing. But it may be you don't have a choice. It may be your boss says to you, "You're going to get on a plane to Mumbai," and you go, "Oh, great, okay."
well,
Then,
you just killed my plans for the nice beach weekend in Somalia.
yeah, I know, and I've been meaning to talk to you about not buying beachfront property there either, but that's a different conversation. Or opening a bar. But anyway, yeah, there are times when we don't have a choice. We have to go to certain places that are not as safe as we'd like them to be. Then you have to elevate your game plan even more. With the hotel situation, if it was me, I would have probably opted for a room on a ground floor, or a room right next to a fire escape, something like that, so that if I had to, I could get out quickly. We go back to the bug out bag thing. One thing I do in any hotel that I'm staying in, I always make sure right before I turn in at night that all of the stuff that I need to get home, car keys, wallet, passport, airline tickets, credit card, all those kinds of things, small pocket flashlight, all of those things are in my little bug out bag right next to the bed. And I've got clothes laid out on the chair, pair of jeans, pair of smart shoes, I mean, things that I can run in and that kind of thing, pair of trainers or whatever, sweatshirt, all that kind of stuff. It's all laid out right next to the bed. And if the fire alarm goes off, or whatever the emergency is at 3 o'clock in the morning, I get out of bed, I jump into the clothes I can get into, I grab my bag, and I'm out of the door. And you can do that pretty quickly. I mean, it's within probably a minute or so, a couple of minutes, something like that. One of the things I was talking to a firefighter about was always make sure that you're carrying a good flashlight with you. And he was talking about walking into burning hotels and the smoke being so thick that, or if the lighting failed and the smoke being so thick you could barely see your hand in front of your face. There are some really good compact flashlights out there these days that produce a lot of light, and they're the size of a roll of quarters. Why would you not carry one when it's so easy to carry it? There's that old saying about in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. Well, when all the lights go out, the smart guy is the guy who's got the flashlight. So to me,
would you suggest one of those military grade ones that I always see lately being out for sale?
Sure. If it's a good quality light, if it's bright, if it's small enough that you can carry it easily. You probably remember the big old D-cell mag lights that were a foot long. They were great lights, but you can't just walk around with one of those things. It's just too big. So small compact lights, pretty bright. Doesn't have to be the brightest light in the store, but pretty bright. And is it just a good, reliable light? If you drop it on concrete and it quits working, it's not any good for you. So it's got to be quite a tough light as well. I was actually given one like that last year for Christmas, and it worked great for about 6 months, and then the on-off switch started failing, and then the light started overheating, so that went in the bin. It's got to be something that works well when you really need it, and if it's waterproof, so much the better. And they're getting cheap now as well. There's no reason not to carry one.
I think I saw like 20 to $30. You can get like a really powerful one these days.
Yeah, there's an ad that's been running on TV quite a lot lately, and it seems like a pretty good light. I haven't actually examined it or used it, but it's that kind of light certainly that you want. It's bright. It's maybe got a couple of extra functions for flashing or flashing a Morse code SOS or something like that. But it's the main thing is it's got to be reliable. It's got to be tough enough that if you drop it in water or bounce it down a flight of stairs or something, that it still functions afterwards. Otherwise, it's just a paperweight.
Well, we've dealt with a lot of different issues on this particular pub talk, but I just wanted to leave it up to you for some final thoughts on what you think is the best advice you could give to somebody who wants to be prepared and keep themselves safe.
Wow, that's an awful lot to kind of digest in one go. Of course, but thanks for the challenge. It really depends on the person, their environment, the number of people that they're responsible for. Is it just themselves or their family or the co-workers, whatever? But I think the main thing is, I'll go back to the thing I say in the book, and I don't mean it as a plug for the book, but be prepared, be aware, and be decisive. If you're prepared, you have simple plans for likely problems. If you're aware, it means you're actually paying attention to what's going on around you, rather than just playing Pokemon on your phone and not being aware of that truck that's just about to hit you. If you're decisive, it means that you've already thought through a potential plan for a possible situation, and you know if or when to put that plan into effect. And it doesn't have to be really complicated. We can keep all this stuff on a very low key, very basic level. If I'm in a public place somewhere and I make a point of recognizing where the emergency exits are, some guy walks in, starts shooting up the place, I know that there's that exit just around the corner from me. I don't have to run all the way across the lobby. I can just go the other way, find that emergency exit, and get right out the door. It's simple things like that. And a lot of time, it's the simple stuff that is all you need to get away from a problem or to deal with it.
Very good. Very good. One thing we haven't touched on, and I'm thinking maybe in the future we'll schedule another pub talk about this, because we've talked about universal danger issues, but we haven't talked about gender-specific issues, say like women dealing with danger.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that could be like a whole program all on its own.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm thinking maybe we'll set one up if you're amenable to it, and sometime in the future. And I might have one of my business partners come on, and she'll be part of the conversation as we talk about what could be like issues that affect women in dealing with danger.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, let's do that. That'll be a lot of fun as well, I think. Just to get a different perspective and slightly different set of concerns as well.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Well, we've been on for about an hour now, and Pub Talk is all about books. It's all about people who read them, people who write them, and people who just love books. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to really thank my guest today, John Higgs, my buddy from Toastmasters. Go out, get the book, Dealing with Danger. It's a great read. I've read it, and seriously, if you want to be prepared for anything that could pop up and surprise you, this is the book to have, just to be able to keep yourself safe. So, Don Schmidt, John Higgs, thank you very much for this edition of Pub Talk. We will be back again next week with another edition. Have a good weekend. Take care.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Tom. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, John. Great talk, great discussion.